Good afternoon, everybody. A warm welcome to this session of the Refresher program on cinema, society, and education. Let me begin with a quote from a favorite artist of mine, Frida Kahlo, who's a Mexican artist who was afflicted with polio as a child and later met with a bus accident which left her, dealing with pain for the rest of her life. This is what she says: "Feet, what do I need you for when I have wings to fly?" In the morning session, Dr. Bandana Jha familiarized us with the representatives of various kinds of disabilities in Hindi cinema. The speaker offered a historical overview, exploring a trajectory beginning with how the differently able were often viewed through the lens of abnormality and hence relegated to playing the marginalized characters, often the subject of ridicule and derision, to now, of course, occupying center stage as the protagonist, sometimes in even highly commercially successful films. While this is a movement in a positive direction, a question that perhaps needs to be explored is how does the issue of gender intersect with the issue of being differently able? How is this intersection represented, interrogated, and challenged in cinema? To examine some of these very, very pertinent issues, we are very privileged to have with us Dr. Meenu Bhambhani, who's CSR and DNI professional with over two decades of experience in the area of human development with specialization in social policy. Dr. Bhambhani started her career as a faculty teaching English literature and moved to working as an assistant commissioner in disabilities with the government of Rajasthan. Currently, Dr. Bhambhani heads CSR and DI for State Street Corporation in APAC. Prior to joining State Street, Dr. Bhambhani spent over a decade at Emphasis, a global IT conglomerate, where she was instrumental in creating opportunities for their programs, especially around addressing systemic challenges to disability inclusion. Her early career was spent working with the World Bank and nonprofit sector on research and disability advocacy. A scholar of International Ford Foundation Fellowships Program, she also has a master's in disability and human development from the University of Illinois at Chicago. She continues to deliver lectures and offer courses in various academic institutions on CSR and disability inclusion. A warm welcome to Dr. Bhambhani. We are really, really happy to have you and looking forward to your address. Over to you, Dr. Bhambhani.
Thank you, Shibani, and thank you, ASRD, I would say, for inviting me here today. It's a privilege, it's an honor, and I'm very humbled because Shibani, you reached out to me after reading a very old paper that was published way back in my professor and guide Jasbir Jain's book on disability and gender. Before I start, I want to know how much time do I have?
You have, a good hour at least.
Huh. Okay. So, as I was preparing for today, I went back to some of my old papers, and especially the one on Bollywood portrayals of women with disabilities. To be honest, I had not revisited that paper in many, many years. It was published and it was done away with and never revisited because, after that paper was published, I went to Chicago to do my master's and got much broader and different perspective around disability inclusion, disability and gender, disability and its intersection with class, with race, with LGBT. So a lot of my perspectives broadened and changed, and even around terminologies. So when I reread my paper, I said that was the time when I was a little immature, and I was not so aware of the right terminologies because I had not studied. I used terminologies like impaired, physically impaired, visually impaired. I never used the word differently abled. And I use the word he or she was disabled. Uh, Whereas we always say people with disabilities or disabled people, um, or persons with disabilities. And I was like, I need to revise and go back and see my and correct my terminologies, the way I have used in them in that particular paper. And but when I was looking at the part around cinema and the projection of women with disabilities and the representation of women with disabilities, I realized so many things continue to remain so true even till today. A lot has changed and a lot has still not changed. So I thought that I will discuss that paper. I do not know how many of you, has anyone read it at all, other than Shibani? I wanted to ask the participants. The paper is titled Bollywood Portrayals of Women with Disabilities.
I don't think this participants can respond right now, but
Okay. I thought I will share the paper here and read out a few excerpts from it, and also show a couple of clips of movies, two movies especially. I wanted to highlight Margarita with a Straw, because that particular movie is a huge shift from how women with disabilities were represented in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s, to how they are represented now. The discourse in more advanced nations is around people with disabilities should be represented by people with disabilities themselves. In US especially, there is this movement that the characters of people with disabilities need to be played by disabled actors or actors who have disabilities rather than non-disabled actors playing that part, because they can never depict the lived experience of a person with a disability. However, when I was looking at Margarita with a Straw, and I realized that that particular movie was pretty close to reality, because it is Malini's story. Malini Chib is a disability rights advocate, and it's her own story. So let me start with my paper, and then maybe we can discuss. I can show a couple of clips, and then we can move forward to a discussion and open question and answer. Does that sound good?
That's perfect. That's perfect.
Okay. Just give me a second. Am I visible?
Your screen is, but
okay, 1 second. Just give me a second. So, I began this paper. Some of the data seems little dated, but seems very true even till today. So I'll start with the first para, that, despite significant numbers, women and girls with disabilities, especially in the developed countries of the ESCAP region, remain hidden and silent, their concerns unknown, and their rights overlooked. Throughout the region, in urban and rural communities alike, they have to face the major problem of triple discrimination by society in general, not only because of their disabilities, but also because they are female and poor. Prejudice prevails even within each of the three categories. Among women, the woman with a disability is seen as inferior, and even among other people with disabilities, she is not their equal. In fact, women with disabilities find themselves in catch-22 situation, in which they are forced into being among the most isolated and marginalized. Thus, they become the poorest of people. This is Anuradha Mohit's observation. Anuradha Mohit is a woman with disability herself. She was Deputy Commissioner for People with Disabilities. And like a lot of women with disabilities, never married. Somehow, this agency and this institution, it's not very easily accessible to women with disabilities. Or, to be honest, people with disabilities. Women with disabilities, are more vulnerable to neglect and physical, sexual, and mental abuse. And this has been, I'm sure you all read newspapers. There are cases of sexual assault against women. And there are so many such cases happen against women with disabilities, especially those in institutions, women living with mental health issues and conditions, women who are deaf. So their disability makes them so much more vulnerable. And the focus is never on their disability. The hue and cry that happens around other normal, quote unquote, normal, what shall I say? The way the media reports and represents, and the way society reacts to it, the reactions are far more muted when it's the case of women with disabilities. It's only the disability sector that raises such concerns, but I have not come across mainstream women's movement taking up the causes of sexual assault or sexual abuse against women with disabilities. A lot of this emanates from the society regarding women with disabilities as non-sexual. They're not considered suitable for marriage. In India, marriages are mostly arranged. A disabled woman gets disqualified for marriage on account of her handicap. If marriage ever takes place, a number of compromises are made. Either they are married to much older men or widowers. And in most cases, non-disabled men get married to disabled women. But the reverse is not true. The dowry demanded by men and offered by families of the disabled women is exorbitant. Disabled women are considered incapable of bearing and rearing healthy children. Society undervalues women with disabilities. She is not considered an ideal child or an acceptable person as an adult, is unfit as an employee, unsuitable as a wife, incapable as a mother. And does this hold true today? In my own case, I am a woman with a disability. I have the lived experience of disability. I am married to a non-disabled person. I am a mother to a child. And when I look back, I got married at the age of 39. I was almost close to 40. When I started in my 20s, I realized that marriage is something that I will not have access to. So my focus became how I can focus more on building my career, focusing more on trying to negate this desire to have a partner, desire to have a companion. So I finished my PhD. I did my PhD in English literature. I got a job. And you create those goals in your life. And once you've achieved those goals, then you want to move on to the next goal. So when I finished my PhD, I got a job. I started my career as assistant professor of English. And all my friends at that time, one by one, started getting married, or they were already married and had children. I'm talking about mid-90s. And I was the only one who was left alone. And at that time, there was this friend of mine who said that, oh, I know this very close friend of mine. He's my husband's friend. He also has a disability and he's a doctor. So maybe we can do some matchmaking. We tried, and I was rejected by a disabled man and his family because I had a disability. And I was questioned on my capabilities, whether I will be able to do all the household work and things like that. So without having the lived experience, because my parents knew my capabilities, but someone who's getting into an arranged marriage, the first question is all these capabilities that are questioned. And this is what we also see historically in a lot of movies, especially Bollywood cinema, where you see most characters with disabilities are relegated to the margins, to the fringes. They would be a disabled old mother who has acquired disability at a much later stage in life due to old age, or a sister who has a disability. Disability is used a lot to create extreme emotions of pity, sympathy, but one does not see any equality. So that, of course, that my personal experience of being rejected by another disabled man became a turning point in my life. My parents at that time gave a matrimonial ad in the newspapers, and the kind of responses I received were mostly from people who didn't have jobs and who thought and who were not eligible in the marriage market because of their being unemployed. And so they thought that this person would be very desperate to marry a person like me because I do not have a disability. I'm an able-bodied person. And somehow, that thing never worked out. I moved on and I started looking at my own lived experience as a woman with a disability, as to what's happening around me. And I started documenting it. And it was from that lens that I started looking at a lot of these Bollywood movies and how women with disabilities are portrayed. I also looked at history. So in fact, in my department, I was the first one, English department, to start looking at representation of disability in literature, representation of disability in cinema. So I think literature has a lot of examples and it's full of characters who have a disability, but I don't think it has been studied from that angle. Now, of course, disability studies is becoming more prominent and one is seeing a lot more literature coming out, but still it is very Western focused. It's where there is very little India focus in that literature. I wanted to highlight a little about the mythology or Indian mythology and how that continues to reflect in our cinema even till today. So if you see, to begin with, disabled women do not have any documented history. They have not set any precedents, which some of the disabled men have, although they too have been projected in a very negative light. Disabled people in Indian mythology, as well as history, have been depicted as cruel and spiteful, normally acting in connivance of some evil. There are only a couple of disabled women that one can find in Indian mythology. One being the one-eyed, orthopedically disabled maid servant of Queen Kekai in Ramayana, called Manthara, who was responsible for Lord Ram's exile, and another is Kubja. Kubja means hunchback. A hunchback gopi in Braj, in whose name Krishna is teased by the gopis. Lord Krishna used to address Kubja as Sundari, meaning a beautiful woman. Lord Krishna saw the inner beauty of Kubja, and the gopis teased him for liking an impaired woman who appeared ugly owing to her disfigurement. Similarly, in our mythological stories, we have heard that women with disabilities are neglected even by lords. According to a katha recited during the month of Kartik Purnima, goddess Lakshmi had an elder sister who could not marry because of being dark and disfigured. When Lord Vishnu proposed Lakshmi, she expressed her inability as her elder sister was still unmarried. Instead, she urged him to marry her sister. Lord Vishnu refused, saying that there is no place for such people in heaven. But he would help her solve her problem and married her elder sister to a peepal tree, which he said was another form of Vishnu. Disabled men, on the other hand, have been shown occupying prominent positions, such as King Dhritarashtra in Mahabharata, or Shakuni Mama in also in Mahabharata. Both have been shown siding with evil. In our history, I can recall of one disabled ruler, and that's Temur Lung, because Lung became his nickname because of the limp that he had. So how this history reflects in our cinema, I want to highlight that. So if you see here, the disabled people, and especially women with disabilities, are projected in a most unartistic and apathetic manner. I think that has changed because when you see Margarita with a straw, you realize that there is now a change that one is seeing. Even movies like Barfi, if anybody has seen Barfi, the protagonist, Priyanka Chopra, is a woman with a learning disability and a very visible disability. Not very attractive, but yet a human side of her character is shown, whether it's her desire, her sexual desire, her desire to have a companion. It's normalized. But in the older movies, if you see, in Bollywood films, the images of men with disabilities are more prevalent. In spite of this disability, which might be interfering with their macho-ness, they are loved and cared by non-disabled females and above all remain desirable. But the reverse in case of women with disabilities is rare. They are objects of beauty, desired and gazed at by mainstream males. This obsession with femininity makes the filmmakers bestow them with impairments which do not interfere with their looked atness. The disabled women who have severe impairments are always in character roles of mother or sister, or seldom in the lead role of protagonist. Also, if you see, the disabilities are acquired. They are not congenital. So they already had a role in the mainstream. They have lived the life of a non-disabled person, and they acquired a disability later. So the acceptance is much easier. It's a transition that they go through, and they're again accepted back into the mainstream. But if it is a disability that is congenital, that they are born with and is not acquired at a later stage in life, the treatment of those characters is very different. So while here I have highlighted a few movies, and I would like to read about them. So at the cost of generalizations, I would like to make some initial statements that there have been some sensitive portrayals which have aroused sympathies. Films like Koshish and Khamoshi have successfully portrayed deaf characters. So if you see, I had used the term hearing and speech impaired characters, but it's a wrong term, because our deaf community, especially objects to this terminology, they call themselves deaf. They have a sign language, so they are sign language users, and deafness is a whole culture in itself within the disability sector. So they prefer the term deaf rather than, and what also happens is in the mainstream, because of lack of awareness, we tend to combine deaf and dumb together, whereas deaf means that they are sign language users, whereas people who are hard of hearing have partial hearing and they can lip read. They do not necessarily use sign language. So that's the difference. So which is where I didn't have awareness, and hence I used terms like hearing and speech impaired characters. So I think these are the things that I need to correct in my history of learning. However, to begin from the beginning, there are hardly any images worth analyzing, as in the 50s, disabled people had marginal existence. In the 50s, films, they were portrayed either as beggars or in other marginal roles, which were totally inconsequential to the plot of the film. These films, however, abounded in images of blind mothers who were poor, miserable, and were taken care of by their only sons, reliving the myth of sons bringing in salvation and being the caretakers. Disability was simply unacceptable, and this made the disabled themselves negate their existence. To cite an example, in 1958, there was a film called Hum Dono. It had Devanand in a double role. In one of the characters, he is portrayed as a disabled war veteran, a situation so unacceptable to him that he asked his own look-alike to present himself as his wife's husband. The fear of rejection by the societal institutions like family forced him to lead a self-abnegated life. A situation of being dead is regarded far better and acceptable instead of being only half alive. In the 60s, there was another film called Arzu, which had Jubilee hero Rajendra Kumar, named Gopal, in the lead opposite Sadhna, who plays Asha. In an accident, Gopal loses one of his legs and he tries to avoid Asha, as he believes his disability would make her life miserable and he will not be acceptable to her as he had been, quote unquote, handicapped. Despite being a doctor by profession, he regards himself to be of no use to anyone and consequently out of the matrimonial market. In one of the scenes, Asha is shown telling Gopal, and I quote, "Ek apahij ki zindagi jeene se to maut bhali. It's better to die than to lead a life as a disabled person." This statement is reflective of society's perception of disability. She, however, continues to love him, and in order to convince him of her love, attempts to get one of her legs amputated. A sacrifice demanded from non-disabled women for disabled men is never reversed. If a woman becomes disabled, she is left lamenting on her plight all by herself. There are two issues which could be focused upon here: the acceptability of disability, which is acquired as a result of some accident, and acceptability of disabled men by non-disabled women. So you see more disabled women being partners with non-disabled lead characters. 70s was a transitional period, and one found quite a few characters with disabilities, um, and especially established stars being the pioneers of change. Severe impairments were still the forte of character actresses like Farida Jalal, who played the role of, now you see, I've used the word wheelchair bound. In disability studies, we never say wheelchair bound. We say wheelchair user, because that's also a tool that gives you mobility. It's whereas in common terminology, everybody calls a person using a wheelchair as wheelchair bound, which is a wrong terminology. So again, as I said, that I need to correct these in my paper. So in Sacha Jhootha, there is another film called Sacha Jhootha, in which Rajesh Khanna has a sister Naz, who plays the part of Belu, lives in the village with her brother Bhola and stepmother. And to escape from stepmom's atrocities, Bhola decides to leave for town so that he can earn enough money to marry off his sister. Belu is illiterate but adept at household work. On the death of her mother, she comes to the town in search of her brother. Her disability leaves her sexually vulnerable, and an attempt is made to violate her modesty, but she is saved in the nick of time by Vinod Khanna, a police inspector. He gives shelter to Belu in his home. The inspector's mother takes a liking to her and decides to arrange her match with her son. But before she decides, she asks Belu if her disability was congenital or was it acquired later on. Again, a reflection of society's attitude and its obsession with the perfection of human bodies. Perhaps, in case had Belu not acquired her disability as a result of an accident, and hence potentially curable, marriage would have eluded her. And this again raises the myth of marriage as a means of empowerment of women. Women's empowerment lies in education, in skill, and in financial self-sufficiency. If you see in most Bollywood portrayals of women with disabilities, you don't see women with disabilities as somebody working, as professionals, as qualified. Most of the time, they are projected or represented as sitting at home and being dependent on someone else. There were 4 different films on disabled women and people in the same decade, namely Kinara, which had Hema Malini, who played the role of a blind dancer. Anurag, which had Maushmi Chatterjee as, again, a blind orphan girl, but she was a good singer. Koshish, which was a sincere and honest effort by writer-director Gulzar, in which Jaya Bhaduri and Sanjeev Kumar played the role of a deaf couple. And finally, Imtihan, in which Tanuja played the part of a person with physical disability. In Kinara and Anurag, one finds the lead disabled women extremely charming, beautiful, and bestowed with unusual artistic gifts. They are loved by Jitendra and Vinod Mehra, the male protagonists of the films, for reasons other than their disability. Again, the disability is acquired. Hema Malini is shown acquiring disability as a result of an accident, partially a responsibility of the male protagonist, who is all the time guilty of being the cause of her disability, whereas blindness of Maushmi Chatterjee and Anurag is cured in the end. So for the first time, a mainstream commercial film like Imtihan showed the disability of female protagonist, which interfered with her quality of being admired and hence rendering her undesirable. Tanuja, who plays the character of Madhu in the film, walks with a slight limp, though once again she is beauty personified. The protagonist Pramod, played by Vinod Khanna, pities her for her disability and loves her for her extremely good and noble nature, which is in sharp contrast to the nature of Bindu, who played the character of a vamp. So, disabled person is either a saint, and that saintliness is projected in contrast to extreme vile nature of the side character, so that it becomes more acceptable. But a disabled character is not supposed to have shades of gray. I mean, all of us have shades of gray. All of us, we are not perfect, whether we have disability or no disability. But the expectation of the society is that the behavior has to be perfect, noble, kind, giving, and flawless. The disabled woman is often seen from the outset as a victim. Her disability may stand for helplessness, innocence, or blighted opportunity. Disabled woman thus cannot be average, moderate, independent, or an underachiever. She is always good to look at, or she has no place in the mainstream cinema. Koshish is a pioneering and sensitive and true to life portrayal of a deaf couple who are shown leading normal lives with their struggles, desires, and interactions with the non-disabled people. But here again, so they have a son who does not have a disability, but the father tries to push the son to marry a deaf girl, and he revolts, which again, I don't know whether it's a reflection, but I still remember one course that I had attended, wherein we were all asked a question that if you are a person with a disability, imagine you have some other disability. And those who do not have a disability, imagine if you have a disability, then what disability would you like to have? And the interesting thing was, so I have a physical disability. I have difficulty walking long distances. I walk, I use a brace. So I have my own challenges, but I have adapted to those challenges. And I'm very comfortable who I am, what I am. I'm very comfortable with my own disability. I had my other classmates, one of them was blind, and he said, I'm blind, but I think I'm pretty much used to being blind. I don't think I would like to have any other disability. I would not want to realize that, oh, I can't walk. I love music, so I can't believe, imagine waking up one day and not being able to hear anything. So I'm comfortable being what I am, who I am. There was my deaf classmate, and she said, I'm very visual. So I like to see everything, and I'm also very mobile. So I'm comfortable being deaf. I know I need sign language interpreters and I need other support, but I don't think I want to be blind or would want to have any other disability. And people who were non-disabled in our class, all of them said, I can't imagine having any disability. So, it's all about how we all learn to live with our limitations. And we're very comfortable with it. And that comfort also comes when we see a lot more people with disabilities around us. We form a community. There is no judgment when we are within that closed inner space. Constantly, and this comes at a much later stage, because initially, for every person with disability, it's all about fitting in. You don't want to be seen with other disabled people. You do not want to be seen as disabled. You want to hide all the markers of disability that exist. Here, I want to show a couple of clips from Margarita with a straw. I'm not too sure whether I'll be able to show it. I will stop sharing this paper for a second, and show that those clips. Is that okay?
Yes, yes.
Can you see? Okay, so let me try doing that. So I'm stopping this now, and let me switch on my Netflix. from that movie. So if you, I do not know how many of you have seen it. It's in the beginning, in the first 6 minutes, where the main protagonist is editing her photos to be uploaded on Facebook. And if you recall, if those of you who have seen it, she is focusing only on her face. She is editing all the photos which show her disability. So the wheelchair is edited, the bottom portion of her body is edited and cropped out. It's only the face that is visible. So technology today has changed, and it is giving people an opportunity to interact with a world where you can hide your disability. You don't have to showcase that. And she wants to be friends. One of her closest friends is also a wheelchair user. If you see in the first 15 minutes, there is another scene where she rejects that friend who is also a wheelchair user, and she says, let's explore. And he has a dialogue at that time. He says, नॉर्मल लोगों से दोस्ती करके तुम नॉर्मल नहीं हो जाओगी. So as a male with a disability, he had also experienced that acceptance is difficult. You will continue to be perceived as quote unquote abnormal. And but it shows what every person with disability goes through, especially women with disabilities, because they are judged on the basis of their looks. They are perceived desirable, non-desirable on the basis of what markers of disability they are using, a wheelchair, stick, or a brace. So she wants to hide all of that because she wants to fit in. She wants to be accepted. And personally, I could relate to that so much. I used to walk with a stick. I still walk with a stick when I'm not using my long leg brace. And I remember when I look back at my college photos or my university photos, my hand is behind me like this, because in none of the photos I wanted the marker of my disability to be seen anywhere. I was all the time with the non-disabled people. So my struggle was, how do I look like them? How can I be like them? And if I am who I am, then I'm not like them. So I will not be accepted. And I will, stand out like a sore thumb in those photographs with my stick being visible. And a lot of people with disabilities go through this. Again, Margarita with a straw. There are scenes where she's exploring her own sexuality. She's shown masturbating, pleasuring herself. She is shown making out. But real freedom she experiences when she goes out of India. Sometimes we all have to make the transition, but not everybody gets that opportunity. So here, disability becomes a class issue. The class you belong to provides you that access to experience a world of quote unquote that is normal for everyone else and different for a person with disability. I think I would like to stop here, and I would rather that people ask me questions, share their observations. I may not be up to date with all the latest movies that have characters with disabilities. What have been your observations?
So I think maybe we can open up the chat right now. Ravinder, maybe we could do that. And in the meantime, let me just sort of, while the participants are typing in their questions, let me just begin the sort of conversation. First of all, I must tell you, that I'm so touched and grateful that you shared your personal journey with us, because I actually did not mention that to any of my colleagues or friends because I did not. I thought that was your prerogative to share or not to share. But I'm so glad you did that because I think this whole business or question of representation that you talk about, okay, to have, others talk for you on your behalf, I think that question is, I think, very well sort of, elaborated in a way, personified by by your whole experience, because I think when people without disabilities talk, I think they talk from a position of privilege, and I think and therefore and that gap does come out. So I think that's
Right.
one thing that's sort of, because whether it's in the terminology that even I think many of us who and we think of ourselves as as people a little bit more of political correctness, I would still not think that somebody who has who's deaf would actually prefer the term deaf instead of being hearing impaired. Okay, so that's a revelation, and and every day you learn something more, and I think because you deal, I mean,
Yeah.
comes from that place is in a much better position to speak for themselves. And I mean, and the sad thing is the opportunity is not always sort of doesn't present itself. So I think the question of representation is a very important one, huh? And that is true in the film industry, because I don't know how many such people are in whatever capacity. I don't know if you have any we have filmmakers, cinematographers, etc., who are challenged in such a way, because we don't hear of such mainstream filmmakers, and that itself I think is quite revealing, that
Yeah. Yeah. And who represents the lived experience of a person with a disability? So I think in Margarita with a Straw, again, it's made by a sibling, because the producer or the director of the film is Malini's sister. So she saw her sister, her cousin. So she has lived with her cousin, and hence it was a little more accurate. But yeah, I have not come across people with disabilities making films, writing stories, um, or playing the characters that they actually represent.
Similarly, the question of class that you sort of bring up towards. In fact, when I watch Margarita with with a straw, I remember writing somewhere some social media post about what if I don't remember the protagonist's name right now. That suppose she was an ordinary lower middle class person, because the wheelchair that she uses is a very fancy wheelchair.
Fancy one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
gives her access. So what happens to if she's not, she has access to Delhi University colleges. Okay, how many
Right.
people sort of have that kind of access? So how when we talk about one kind of challenge, we also sort of need to be sensitized towards other kinds of challenges that intersect with that particular one. So I think Margarita with a straw, in that
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
area I thought was a little, also the fact that Kalki looks so good, kind of takes away, maybe why does
Right.
always you have to compensate the fact that she is somebody who is challenged with the fact that she's so beautiful, so
Right.
that again
Right.
was
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
so uh, let me try and read some of the things from the okay. I think I'll open my phone because I think here I am unable to sort of see the questions very well. uh, Yeah. A lot of comments thanking you. This is from Tara. Thank you for giving us your invaluable experience by being with us. This was eye opening. Richa Malhotra, again, thanking you for your excellent insight. It's been an overwhelming experience. Renu Singh has a question. When we talk about disability with an urge for relationship or sexual needs, we always talk about Margarita with a straw, while Barfi also talks about a disabled protagonist who wants to explore love. Why is Barfi less talked about? If you would.
Yeah. So I think in Barfi, the way the movie was made, I don't think it was about disability. It was about Ranbir Kapoor. It was about locations. It was about songs. I mean, for me, the memory of Barfi is the songs and not necessarily the story. And I think that could be one of the reasons why Barfi is less spoken about from the perspective of representation of disability or a person with disability having the desire to explore relationships. But I think there is a very key difference between Barfi and Margarita with a Straw because they're very different movies. In Barfi, both the lead characters have a disability. They are part of the disabled community where they are not being judged by, they are not judging each other. They are, because both of them know their limitations. They are away from the world, the external world, all the mainstream world. They have carved out a living for themselves. They have created a cocoon for themselves. Their interaction with the non-disabled world is very limited. Whereas Margarita with a Straw is spoken about because she is constantly talking about her interaction with the non-disabled world. Then it's in the college, where other non-disabled young ladies about her sexuality. Together, they have already been exploring all this in Barfi. So that could be one of the reasons why it is not spoken the way Margarita with a Straw is talked about. Okay. But that's my view. There could be multiple views around it. And sometimes, it takes, you have to see the movie again and again because cinema is so nuanced. In just one sitting, you just can't generalize. So you have to go through that experience of watching it and researching about it, and then seeing the movie again and again from those varied nuances that they are suggesting you to look at from.
Next question is from Dr. Lakshmi Pandey, who essentially wants to ask if you see any difference in human beings, how we address in our mentality towards disability. I think over a period of time is what she means when she talks about, in modern and postmodern era, especially with regards to female. Is there a difference that you notice generally?
Oh, that's a very intellectual question and a very academic one. I do not know whether I am any longer an academic to answer this question. The way I have moved away from I think there is a difference. The difference is, again, I can share from my own lived experience. And I can divide my life between before 2001 and after 2001, and how I was perceived, how I perceived myself before and after that. I have a fellowship to go abroad and to do my second master's in disability and human development. I had never experienced living alone. Was always protected by my family. But I knew that I craved for liberation. I craved for freedom. I just felt that as long as in this Indian scenario, if I'm living here with my parents, I will never be able to explore any relationship with anybody. And I internalized that. That marriage is something that will never happen to me. I will never be able to attract anybody or attractive myself. When I went to the US for the first, I experienced freedom. I experienced an open culture. I went to bars, I went to pubs, I went with my classmates, and I went on a wheelchair. I was constantly, because in India you have auto rickshaw and rickshaws, and you have a lot of chaos, and that chaos also gives you a lot of comfort because those countries are way too organized. So coming from a chaotic system to which one had adapted to getting into a super organized system, anywhere, it's not like I have to go to a shop, I'll ask the auto wala, bhaiya, दुकान के बाहर रोक दीजिएगा ऑटो. वहां पे तो you have to walk so much. So within first 10 days of reaching there, I realized that first I thought this country is not for me. I can't walk so much. And then I had to get onto a wheelchair. And that was my first experience of living the life on a wheelchair. So, which was liberating, but it was also not so liberating many times because older cities were not very accessible. But because to navigate railway stations, which were huge, to bus stands, everywhere I had to be on my wheelchair. And in spite of being on my wheelchair, I felt very confident. People would generally come to you. They will not look at your wheelchair, but they will look at you, have a conversation, a very normal conversation. How's the weather today? What do you think? Where are you going? Are you also waiting for this bus? And they will have these casual conversations, whereas I never experienced that ever in India. And like people would generally come and give a compliment, saying, "Are you from India?" Most of them would come to me and they would say that if I was from Spain, they would mistake me as Hispanic, and then they would say that, "Oh, you're very beautiful. Oh, you have such beautiful eyes," and it gives you that confidence, and your self-esteem just goes up by many notches. That in spite of sitting on a wheelchair, somebody is looking at you and giving you a compliment and finding you beautiful, and not just looking at your disability. You are being looked at as a whole. I think that difference is there, and that is what you see being reflected in today's some of the movies. I would still say we have a long way to go, but and then when I came back to India, I think that confidence, that self-esteem in my own self. I started dating after I came back. We dated for 6 years and then I got married. And I got married to a non-disabled person. Not that it would have mattered, but and I realized that it didn't matter to anyone else either. At the end of the day, it was between me and my husband and our lives. So these were the so I became liberated enough to have a choice. And I think that is a shift that one is seeing. But again, those are very, very fortunate few who experience this. I think the mentality, especially in smaller towns, especially in certain castes and class, continues to remain pre-modern, I would say.
Okay. We'll move on to another question. There are many coming in. This is by Mohini. She says, can we say that patients with schizophrenia and other serious mental disorders, can we see them as more disabled, as their disability cannot be seen and remains untreated, unaddressed for long, and therefore is the stigma attached also that much more? That's the question.
That's true. That is true. It's not that they are seen as more disabled. So, in disability, what we say is that each disability is different. Even within, if I say locomotor disability, my own disability, I would say that there are variations. Someone could be a wheelchair user, someone could be a crutch user, someone could be a stick user, someone could be using a brace, someone could have 40% disability, someone could have 80% disabilities, someone may have spinal injury. So there are variations and variations within each disability. Similarly, if you look at blindness, there is low vision, there is color blindness, there is night blindness, there is legal blindness, there is peripheral vision, there is central vision. So there is low vision. There are different categories even within visual disability. Mental disability or people living with mental health conditions, the awareness continues to remain very, very low. There continues to remain huge stigma around it, and it remains a problem. It remains a problem of the family to deal with it. The therapies, the interventions, they start very late. And because the focus is more on curing, that you just wish it away. And that doesn't happen. Especially mental health conditions, they cannot be cured. You have to live with them. You have to manage them. They're like any other disability in that sense. So yeah, I agree with you that invisible disabilities are also much harder to explain, to seek support, and to seek community.
This is a question from Shazia Siddiqui Khan, okay, where she I think that's a movie you wanted to talk about also, so this should be of interest to you, Hitchki, and
Yes.
talks about the progression, of course, and how we show the differently able, where Hitchki, of course, shows her as determined and educated with a successful career, but she is not shown as having a love interest. So she was, your comments on that.
I can't comment because I've not seen Hitchki. I've not been able to find it on any OTT platform. So I think I would reserve my comment. I guess if there is no love interest, maybe the story writer or the script writer did not think that a person like her can have a love interest. And her inclusion in society depends only on her being successful and being independent.
Okay.
Because there is a denial of agency or access to agencies and institutions like family, like marriage, to a lot of people with disabilities. And it's not coded anywhere, it's not written anywhere, but that's how it is.
Can I just, this is just, but can we also possibly see the fact that, of course, you've not seen Hitchki, but without going into the specifics of the movie, if you do not show the character who as having any kind of a love interest, but can it also be seen as an empowering factor? The fact that you don't necessarily need a love interest to
Right.
make it,
Yes.
not to,
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Uh, this is a question from my colleague Jyotsna.
Mhm.
In Kannada, we have a deaf actor in Malayalam named Vaikam Vijaya Lakshmi, who's visually impaired singer, a music director in Malayalam who's visually impaired and works for mainstream films. Okay, and though they are not willing to term themselves as disabled, this is just a comment, but it's an interesting. So we do have, we were talking about examples. If we have
Right.
industry. So,
Yeah. So, uh, I just want to comment that it's not easy to identify yourself as a person with disability, which is why I highlighted that scene in Malviya with her straw where she is cropping out all the markers of disability. Wherever her disability is seen, her wheelchair is being seen, she wants to put those photos where her disability is not seen because you want to fit in. Uh, for me, I have gone through that experience where I would not talk about my disability, where I would hide my disability, where I would hide the markers of my disability. And that's a journey that all people with disabilities go through. Unless um, you go through that journey of meeting many people with disabilities, having that community of people with disabilities, where you are not judged uh, or not seen from a very judgmental point of view, you don't develop pride in your disability and you don't talk about it. So you say that I am successful in spite of my disability. So why should I talk about my disability? Whereas when you go through that journey, self identify as a person with disability, start taking pride in your disability. Somewhere, if you see most people with disabilities who work in the disability space or write about it also have very strong pride in their own disabilities, and they have a community of people with disabilities to go back to where they can make fun of their own disabilities. These become inside, they become, there's an insider's language and an insider's world that you create within that community. Whereas in a non-disabled world, you are constantly being judged. So you don't want to identify your disability and keep it hidden so that you don't lose out on opportunities. People don't think that you are getting opportunities because you have a disability. And so that's a journey that all people with disabilities go through at some point in their lives.
uh, another question from Dr. Anupriya Roy Srivastava. She says most able people play the role of differently able on screen. How willing are filmmakers to cast women with disabilities in cinema?
Sorry, I missed the question.
Would filmmakers be interested in, having
Women with
actors with
disability?
disabilities in their movies? Do you think so?
I don't know. I can't answer that question. I have not seen, at least in India, um, no, here there is no movement either where we have disabled actors or actors with disabilities pushing um, that they be featured in their own stories. They represent their disabilities rather than someone else representing their disabilities.
There is an interesting question observation by Neha Pandey, who
Mhm.
talks about Sanjay Bhansali's Black. Okay, and she says, I
Yeah,
see that Sanjay Bhansali subtly addresses the embedded sexual desires in Rani Mukherjee's in the film Black by
yeah,
using the color red, to suggest some kind of sexual desire in the film.
right. Yes, yes. I agree with you.
Uh, Another question by Jyotsna, who earlier remarked about, how there are all these people in the Telugu industry, but, who don't necessarily call themselves as disabled, etc. She says, in Telugu films, visually impaired women are portrayed making rangoli or weaving garlands, making them fit into the feminine roles. Not only disability, gender too is misrepresented as women in softer roles, making two feminine aspects of life. Can we see both gender and disability are at the risk of being misrepresented in such films?
Yeah. Um, I mean, if you see where are, I mean, if I see strong characters uh, of women without disabilities, a lot of them are addressed through sports, whether it's representation of Mary Com to Panga, where Kangana Ranaut is a kabaddi player and her struggles. So a lot of strong characters are portrayed uh, through that, through the medium of sports. But other than that, yeah, disability and women with disabilities are portrayed in the periphery, in the margins, um, doing these things like making rangoli and weaving gardens. I have not seen many Telugu movies. I'm sorry. I have to see them to be able to comment on them.
No, that's all right. I think, but I think the point is sort of well made, that, you end up sort of portraying both in a rather cliched manner if you just show women as making rangolis and, doing such things. I had a couple of things to ask you. Do you see any difference, although you're primarily focused on, what you, on Bollywood cinema, Hindi cinema, do you think Western cinema, Hollywood cinema for that matter, represents disability, especially in women, any differently?
So I have one more paper which I had written where I had compared Hollywood portrayals and Bollywood portrayals. So I had looked at Satyam Shivam Sundaram and the piano, these two movies. And in the piano, it is the lead character uh, who's mute. She's not deaf, but she's mute and she plays piano beautifully. And her struggles and how she is represented and depicted. Again, I have not seen too many Hollywood movies. I'm quite a Bollywood buff, so I see more Bollywood. Uh, so I won't be able to comment, but we I know that uh, Bollywood has a lot of characters, male characters like Tom Hanks and others uh, who have played the characters of people with disabilities. But other than, I can't remember right now. I'm sorry, I don't want to comment on something that I'm not too well versed with. So I have
There's
to see more movies.
absolutely good excuse to watch more movies. That's always a good.
Yeah.
In the previous section, I was actually, the person also spoke about portrayal of disability, but not gender specific. And there were a lot of questions on how, the LGBTQ community, or the homosexual community is always sort of portrayed in a rather sort of, derogatory manner, etc., or they're just made fun of. Okay. I don't want to get into that. My question was, do we, when we club, homosexuality or LGBTQ with disability, is there a problem with that itself? Are we looking at those issues? Are we looking at someone who is, who's gay or lesbian? Are we looking at, that as a disability? Because that to me sounded very, very problematic.
No, I don't think so. See, there are intersections of uh, disability and LGBT, because anybody can have a disability, whether it is a woman or a man, from any religion, from any caste, from any class, uh, even from LGBT community. So disability intersects with multiple identities, but just because it intersects with LGBT um, does not mean that that is a disability, because the LGBT community does not identify itself with disability community. So that community is a whole world in itself. But the popular perception continues to remain non-acceptance of that difference. And the popular perception is also that it's something quote unquote not noble. And what is not noble could be disabled.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, somebody, would you want to comment on the movie Aligarh, if you have, because somebody, I think, Dr. Saeed Mubin Zehra, she talks about it, and she talks about, how, where is the question? The question has just disappeared in my chat box. Let me just sort of, she talks about how, it's a strong statement, okay, and if you have any comments to make about that movie.
Mm, uh, Aligarh. Again, I've not seen the movie, so I can't comment. I'm
So,
actually noting down all these movies that you are mentioning so that I can go and watch them.
So, as somebody who's dealt with this topic, what are the kind of, possibly that will be the last question because we're almost out of time. Huh? So, what are the kinds of movies, that you would want mainstream Bollywood cinema, especially to take up when, as far as disability and gender is concerned? What kind of movies would you like to be seen made?
Uh,
Or issues to be addressed?
I think what I would like to see is, I mean, that's a dream. And I'm sure cinema has its own compulsion, what will sell, what will work. So a lot of people do a lot of research on it. But yeah, I think when you see movies like, say, Guzarish, where Hrithik Roshan has a disability and it's about euthanasia, um, you feel that the life of a person with disability is not worth living. And so what one would imagine or want in movies is a disabled life, a life of a person with disability is not a sad life. It can be a happy life. It can be a positive life. It can be a quote unquote normal life. Because what is projected constantly is either struggles, discrimination, stigma, uh, overachievement, cure, and inclusion, rather than having disability the way it is. So I think that would be my dream, to see more. And I think like Tare Zameen Par, I think that was a game-changing movie. because for the first time it spoke about learning disabilities, invisible disabilities. And I think it sensitized a lot of schools to start looking at learning disabilities and, and providing support and accommodation to children with disabilities rather than labeling them as incapable students. So I think one would like to see movies like that, which I'm sure, I know a lot of people said that it was a melodrama. And whenever I see that movie, I cry quite a lot. But I just felt that I didn't know much about learning disabilities. And after that, I started learning more about it. So just by having one experience of disability does not make you an expert around all disabilities, because each disability is very different. And movies like that really help change the perceptions.
I think that's a good note to end on. Thank you so much for this lovely talk, for enlightening us, such a nuanced talk, and sort of a great participation that I think, because of the reason that you spoke from the heart, you spoke about your own experiences. It was not just something that we saw on that on the screen, and it was a heartfelt and came from lived experience. So thank you very much for that, and hope to have you back someday, and for another of this.
Thank you so much, Shivani. And I must thank all the participants. Your comments, your questions just kept me so alive. So I truly appreciate all of you. And thank you for sharing recommendations of so many movies that I have not seen. So I'm taking that with me, and I'll be watching more movies. So maybe in the next session, maybe I'll talk about these movies that you have recommended.
Thank you. Thank you.